looking at what the perfect AP transaction. So what is a perfect AP transaction? Well, the good news is it's not a myth, but the perfect AP transaction occurs when a product is ordered correctly and approved, when it is accurately, the purchase order is generated, it's accurately delivered, it is invoiced correctly, and the invoice is paid correctly. So, fairly simple, right? So what we have is that the purchase requisition equals the purchase order equals the delivery receipt, the vendor receipt, or the vendor invoice, excuse me, is invoiced for what was actually delivered, and the AP check pays for what was invoiced. Again, sounds fairly simple. So why are there so many challenges with AP transactions? Well, the simple answer is that life happens, right? So we have documents going to the wrong place, we have natural challenges, we have delivery problems, and also involved in this process, or throughout the process, are people. And as we know, people are not perfect, and they will inevitably make mistakes. So the challenges occur in accounts payable when we are dealing with the handling of exceptions. So when these documents do not equal, or when they are not in sync, that's when we have challenges. So the communication is the key back and forth when we're working with handling exceptions. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about this morning. So taking a look at improving accounts payable performance. We want less of what is on the left column and more of what's on the right column. And why? And you can see just a quick glance. I'm not going to go through all of these, but the items on the left are really transactional in their manual in their nature. And they are either causing problems or they are the result of problems in the process. So the items on the right are really process improvements, and they help reduce the problems or identify the problems before they occur. So that's a great thing, right? And I think everyone agrees that we want more automation, less paper. But when I show this to dozens of accounts payable managers, their responses really are almost always the same. You know, John, they tell me, I would love to have more items, or I'd love to have the items in the more column, but I'm so buried on items in the less column that my team is working nights and weekends, oftentimes just to close the month. So how do we get there? Well, we know that adding staff is not an option, and this has been the case for a lot of years and will continue in the foreseeable future. Everyone seems to want more teachers, but they don't want more support staff inside the schools. So one of the answers is using technology to gain efficiency in the process. So if we can make machines or enable machines to make better and faster decisions, we can effectively remove some of the items on the left column and free up the staff to work on the more column. And this builds a little bit of momentum in the accounts payable process. So the less paper we have to process, the more quote-unquote perfect our AP transactions become, and the less time we have to spend on what I'm going to call low-value tasks, and more your staff can focus on improving departmental processes. So if you can add value and reduce costs in a meaningful way by focusing on the right side of the column, it reduces the amount of errors and challenges we see on the left side of the column. And so with this is kind of the overall backdrop, with us wanting to do more of what's in the more column and less of what's in the less column, let's take a look and see how technology can help. But first, just a quick introduction of who Harvest Technology Group is. And I think hopefully you'll also see that this will be worth spending a few minutes of your time on this afternoon. So at Harvest Technology Group, we've been working with SunGard K-12 clients to help solve AP challenges and improve document management efficiency since 2001. We've got a lot of experience with the unique challenges of K-12 schools, and we're the only preferred partner in this space. Our solution, which I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, called Content360, can help solve some of these challenges. But my goal with this presentation is to be more technology agnostic. So we're going to take a more educational approach and less of focusing on a specific solution. So another quick note that I'm aware of, and if you're in the finance office of a K-12 school, which I'm going to assume you are, is that the accounts payable process is really part of the larger procure to pay process. So the entire process starts maybe with purchasing. It also includes the receiving department, vendor management, and the accounting department, taxes, and other areas. I know that in most K-12 school districts, the finance department in general has a lot of different responsibilities. This is a bigger subject than we're going to tackle this afternoon. We're just going to focus on the small area that is accounts payable. And in that area, we're really going to focus on how do we better improve our invoice processing. So let's take a look at that. So if you're looking at technology to help solve accounts payable challenges, the first thing you have to do is you really need to get paper out of the process. And I know this seems obvious, but it is very difficult, if not impossible, to have any sort of a dramatic impact on your accounts payable efficiency if you're still working in paper. You are single-threaded by nature. It's prone to error. It's prone to challenges and lost documents. So we've got to get the paper out of the process. I know that many people that may be listening to this presentation have already taken this step. You may already be scanning documents into a central location. But if you're like many school districts we've talked to, this process probably has received some mixed results. Just getting paper into a digital format is not enough. As we discussed earlier, we really need to let technology take over some of the manual processes for us. We need to get out of having to move even digital processes. As I mentioned previously, Content360 is our solution for document management, but it's not the only solution on the market. Obviously, you have to have something to assist you with getting rid of paper. So around this process, we're going to look at advanced invoice capture to start with, and then we're going to walk through each of the different steps here. So with advanced invoice capture, you're going to combine a couple of different technologies, one of which is OCR, and then we'll talk about some advanced categorization algorithms to help us make decisions about what to do with inbound invoices. We're also going to leverage data in our SunGuard applications to match that information with what we've located on the invoice. And finally, we're going to route these invoices for approval, encoding via workflow, and then post it for payment. So we're going to kind of look at each one of these steps in the overall process, and I'll show you what technologies can do to help gain efficiencies there. So the first step in the process is capture. And notice I didn't say scan, and that's by design. If at all possible, we want to remove scanning from our process. It is much more efficient to receive invoices already in a digital format. And to this end, I'll highly encourage you, if you have not already, you want to assign an email address specifically to your accounts payable department and encourage your vendors to email invoices there. So accounts payable at whatever your school district is.com. The reason being is that you're going to replace your scanning process and put that onto the vendors, onto your vendors. And there are a lot of incentives you can use to expedite that process. If you're having vendors who are not wanting to scan documents, it's a good idea. You can go ahead and offer additional payment terms, faster payment terms, to try and get as many people as you can emailing you digital invoices. From there, you're also, though, no matter how much incentive, no matter how much carrot or stick you use, you're going to have some vendors who have to send in paper invoices. Those must be scanned, and those are either going to be scanned in a central location or in local locations throughout the district. Now, a quick note here, some school districts will want to keep the paper process alive, and in fact, we talk to school districts who even print the invoices they receive via email because they require some sort of a manual signature on the invoices, or they send them out to individual departments for GL coding. We'll talk about how we can handle those requirements, but suffice to say, we want as little interaction with the actual paper copy of the invoices as possible. The best practice, this is definitely best practice, as it limits, the opportunity for the paper to get lost, to get misfiled, to get coffee spilled on it, or anything else. But once the paper is out of a paper format and into a digital format, we have to run what we call classification. And what this is determining what exactly are we looking at. So this is all, by the way, happening behind the scenes in the software, in the technology. So am I looking at an invoice? Is it a statement? It is a cover letter? Some solutions do this in a template-driven basis. So they are looking for specific information in a specific location. Some technologies use a whole page approach, which gives you a little more flexibility. But what we're trying to determine is what exactly did we scan or did we receive? And does it match any of our current invoicing processes? So the goal is to determine the type of invoice and then follow the routing rules that are assigned to the process. So PO-based and non-PO-based invoices follow different paths in most K-12 school districts. So do utility bills, expense reports, other invoice type documents. Once these are successfully classified, which actually may require some manual intervention. Every once in a while, you're going to get a weird invoice or something that has a lot of handwriting on it that we're not able to determine, and that will require some manual intervention. But once we've classified it, we've determined exactly what we're going to look at, the next step is to actually pull data off of the document. So in this portion, what we're going to be doing is extracting information off of the document. We're going to be turning the information from an image into usable digital information. And the most common method of doing this is what we call optical character recognition, or OCR. Again, going into a digital document, finding information, and then transferring it into a digital format. Now, OCR is probably the most common method of using data extraction, but it's one of many that are available in today's modern capture solutions. So again, we will use OCR for machine printed characters. You can use ICR to actually grab hand printed characters, OMR to look and see if boxes are checked, determine whether a signature is present on the document, and even to extract line item details off of an invoice. And this becomes very, very important later on when we look to compare what we're being invoiced to what was in the purchase order. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. So again, if at any point in time you have questions, go ahead and enter them into the chat window, and then you can, I will see them and then answer them at the end. All right. Once we have the data extracted off of the invoice and it's in a usable format, in this case a machine-written format, we're able to use that information and compare it to ODBC values taken from our SunGuard database. So if in the example of a PO-based invoice, I have a lot of information in SunGuard about this transaction, I can now take a look at the information located in SunGuard, compare it to the information that was extracted to the invoice, and figure out if it matches up. Keep in mind that all this is happening now on the back end of the process. So this is all happening without manual intervention yet in the process. If I do run into problems, so if the data doesn't equal, or if I find pieces of the information that are out of tolerances that I've set, so, or I'm having problems with reading the data, so I can't tell the difference between a 1 and a lowercase l and an exclamation point. If I have run calculations and I find that item total times quantity doesn't equal line item total, we can then route these invoices to a user for exception processing. And this is a very simple process. We want to avoid as much of this as possible, again, because this is requiring someone's time to go in and look at the documents or at the invoices. But what we will see in our exception processing is an image of the invoice, as well as all of the data that has been extracted from that invoice. And in this example, we see a couple of spaces where we've highlighted information. It looks like the software wasn't sure if it was a 0 or an O. And so we can go in there, we can make corrections at this point in time if I'm an exception process user. So once we have the data successfully extracted, we determine what the document is. We've pulled the data out of it. Oh, and by the way, the exception process handling, if everything goes well, that's the first time that anyone has to lay eyes on that invoice, and that is not always the case. So we call the exception processing because those are invoices that fall outside of our normal process. So looking at the data that is located on the invoice, comparing it with data we've pulled out of the SunGuard application, we can determine the most efficient manner of handling the document. So what is your invoice approval process? How can we automate that? And this is different for every school district based upon your local laws, based upon the superintendent, based upon the custom, how have you always processed invoices. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the individual processes, but rather I want to make sure that I provide you with information that should be included in any sort of a workflow solution. So once I have the paper in a digital format, what am I going to do with it? I need to route it. I need to follow my current business processes or my current legal requirements to get that invoice paid quickly. Now, as a side note, again, I'm not sure what your workflow process is, but if it involves paper, we want to try and remove that and get it into a digital format. So some of the items that you want to look for in a workflow solution. There are a couple of key concepts here, and I'm just going to go through them quickly. The first is the concept of system work. And what we want is we want the workflow software to do as much of the items in the less column as possible. For example, if I've got an invoice that arrives into the software, it's below a certain dollar amount. The quantity and the total match up with the purchase order. Do I need to have human eyes on that invoice, or can I automatically pass it through for payment? So we want the software to determine the most efficient method of routing these invoices. The next concept is to be aware of is timers. So once a document enters into our organization, once it's received via mail or via email, what happens to it? How long does it take at each step in our workflow process? We use timers to make sure nothing falls through the cracks. In conjunction with timers, we use notifications. So making sure that your team stays on track, they stay on task. The most common method of notification by far is email, and emails are received when certain actions have taken place in the workflow. So a new invoice is received, it requires departmental management approval. We can automatically email the manager of the department to let him know that he's got to go into the workflow solution to approve the invoice. What we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that all available tasks are presented to the user so they know what to work on. We also want to make sure that all the information needed to make a decision is presented to those users at the same time. And then finally, we want to make sure that we're recording what's happening in the workflow process so we can go back through and look at it from an auditability and a traceability perspective. So just by quick example, This is Content360. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I want to show you just from an example's sake what it looks like. An email is generated. It includes a link. A user clicks the link. It takes them into the workflow system where they can see all the tasks that are assigned to them. They can see all the steps in the workflow process. They can determine what their next step options are. So at each different step in the workflow process, there are different options available to the user. Again, also, as I mentioned, we want to make sure that we provide them with all the information they need to make a decision. So we have supporting documentation over here, which they can access very rapidly by just clicking through and viewing the additional documents. That will help them in their decisioning process. So again, nice, clean, concise, all the information needed to make a decision at your fingertips. And that's very important if you want users to begin to adopt any sort of a workflow or document management solution. So once the document has routed through workflow, and again, I don't want to shortchange workflow. It's a very important part of any sort of AP automation initiative, but it is a piece that is going to be very different for most organizations. But the final step we want to do once a document has gone through a workflow approval process is that we want to take the data that we've extracted and use it. What we don't want to have to do is go back into SunGuard and key in this information over again. So what we're doing in this example is the document is in the document management solution. It's going through the workflow process. The data that comes out of the workflow process, oh, and by the way, part of the workflow process is typically going to be some sort of GL coding. But when information comes out of the workflow process, we can then automatically dump it into SunGuard. Now, if you're using Business Plus or Finance Plus, there is some workflow inside of those applications as well. If you want to use that workflow process, you've already invested in the technology, no problem. I still recommend using OCR or capture technology to get the data to eliminate the keying of information into SunGuard. But then that's fine. All we're doing in that example is we're moving the workflow process into the SunGuard application and out of a document management solution. So the same efficiencies can be gained by using document scanning, using OCR, ICR, other capture technologies, and then injecting the information into SunGuard. So that takes a look at the advanced invoice processing. Again, capturing the information, finding out what we've got, classifying it, extracting the data, routing it through workflow, and then eventually posting that invoice data into SunGuard for automatic payment. Let's take a quick look at some additional automation technologies. And some of these are rising steadily in popularity amongst some K-12 school districts, and we'll talk about that. So the first, print, capture, and delivery. Your SunGuard applications are typically going to generate some sort of a PDF file as output. And this is purchase order data. This could be check remittances. There's a lot of different documents that are created out of your SunGuard finance application. Much of this right now is being printed. So this is my plea, my imploring to the school districts that are out there to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Use automatic emailing if at all possible. So you have the ability to email those documents, go ahead and email them without printing them. At the same time, store them in a document management solution. That saves you from having to go back and to recreate these documents at a later date. And finally, if you're able to, I highly suggest looking at some sort of a vendor portal. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But the vendor portal takes even the email process out of the way and allows you to submit documents to a location where either employees or vendors can go at their leisure, browse to that information, search for it securely, and then download what they're looking for. So vendor portals are one of the more rapidly adopting technology inside of Accounts Payable. So what we're talking about here is the ability to post finance information to a website where it's self-served by users or employees, or allow users and vendors and employees to submit information. And these typically go in this order, kind of a step one, step two process if you're looking at a vendor portal. The first is that you want to publish instead of print or email. So I'm taking my purchase orders, I'm sending and posting them to an internet site, and maybe sending an email notifying the vendor that the purchase order is available. Same thing with an employee check remittance. I know in the finance department of many K-12 school districts, you cross over responsibility with human resources. But again, a great thing to do, post this information out to a location securely, let the vendors and employees self-serve on the documents. The second step in this is letting your employees and vendors do the same. So in a recent study, 36% of organizations are looking to portals for web form invoice submittal. So we can take a lot of the steps I just mentioned earlier out of this process if I can get vendors to submit invoices via my vendor portal. The information is already formatted in the way that I need it to be. It's already lined up with the purchase order inside of SunGuard. So a lot of the paper and even the electronic form processes that we were talking about earlier go away if we can get our vendors to post invoices to a portal. We can also use e-forms for information capture. So if I am building electronic forms, employees or vendors can go and they can fill those out. They can submit them into the document management solution, and I can remove that step of the process altogether. One of the most exciting, at least I think, trends in accounts payable technology is the ability to use social networks and social media securely. So this is just a quick example of a post I threw up earlier into a Yammer site. Yammer is a technology from Microsoft, but hey, please see the attached invoice. We ordered 4 in blue. You delivered 3 in red and charges for 6 in green. That process kicks off a dialogue between me and my vendors, a secure dialogue where we may post and upload different information to help resolve this problem. As I mentioned earlier, and we'll mention again, the key to handling exceptions in your accounts payable process is the ability to rapidly and quickly communicate. So social is a new frontier. Not a lot of accounts payable departments are using it yet, but we see this as an increasing method of being able to resolve challenges in the accounts payable process. So we're just about at the 30-minute mark as promised. Let's just, as a quick recap, what does good accounts payable look like? Well, I can't stress enough, but obviously most of what I've been talking about is communication. So how do you communicate with your vendors? How do you handle resolutions? How do you communicate with your departments? And doing this, as you can imagine, in a paper-based system is very, very challenging. You can outperform the industry. So if you have industry benchmarks that are set, there's a lot of websites that capture industry information. You can grab those and just see how your department is doing against the industry. 100% perfect purchase orders. We talked about what a perfect AP transaction looks like. If you get to 100%, you'll be the first. So please let me know, and I will be more than happy to arrange some sort of a ticker tape parade or a trophy delivered to your office. We're not there yet, but we want to get as close to 100% as possible. As we mentioned earlier, no paper generation or minimum paper generation. And you want to also move from the left column of items that are more transactional in nature, more manual in nature, and you want to move towards buyer effectiveness, where you're transitioning users from just doing manual processes to actually impacting your district with increased discounts, with working with fewer vendors, increasing your vendor relations, and really helping out in the larger procure-to-pay process and not just in the accounts payable invoice process. So any questions? I'll keep this slide up just for a second. If there are any questions, you can pose them in the chat window. So far, we don't have any, which is just fine. Also, I'll throw up my contact information. If you have any information or any questions, if you would like to see more about our technology, or if you'd like to just discuss accounts payable technology in general, please either drop me an email, join us on our website. There's a lot of information on our website. This presentation will be posted on our website. If there were someone in your office that you wanted to see who was not able to attend, I will forward the link to you in an email in a subsequent as soon as it's posted to the website. It'll probably be in the next day or so. So thank you all very, very much for your time. I hope you enjoy a fantastic Thursday, and take care. We hope to see you on future webinar events with Harvest Technology Group or at an upcoming SunGuard show. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.